Many have said that the regional center development has been the genius of Good News Productions International. They certainly have increased opportunities in redeeming the time. Though moving Good News Productions International from Zimbabwe to Joplin was a very difficult decision, it did open the door to be in contact with many missionaries and international students from Ozark Christian College, other colleges, and various universities. This could not have been done from Zimbabwe, especially at that time because the borders were closed to other countries. The work expanded quickly, and the first addition to the Joplin facilities was added in March of 1980. By 1983, it became necessary to expand again with larger studios, increased staff members, a library, and housing for project workers. This was actually dedicated on March 16, 1985. It became apparent that centers in other places around the world would greatly enhance the goals of what now had become Good News Productions International. A flagship of the ministry from the beginning was cultural sensitivity. Placing communication specialists around the world and developing partnerships were keys in accomplishing this. We believe that God has led in a dramatic way as the right people rose to the challenge of establishing those regional centers. We first look at Damoh, India. Dr. Vijay Lal, husband of Pushpa and father of David and Ajay, had arranged with me to bring his son David by Good News Productions International in Joplin for a visit. David was not even aware of his plan, but as Dr. Lal had prayed, it turned out that David came to Joplin for an internship program in 1982. He had a degree in electronics from India and had taken further work at Cincinnati Bible Seminary. David actually rewired our entire audio studio and worked hard while he was here. David caught a vision for the use of video, which would soon begin to explode in India. By 1985, David had already begun a Hindi radio broadcast in cooperation with Gospel Broadcasting Mission and Laverne Morris. But he was now ready to move into videotape production and asked me to come for a visit. So in January of 1986, I made that visit. It seemed feasible that video could be a major step forward in supplying a lot of the new house churches with their Sunday lesson material, since there were actually so few evangelists. Damoh was a perfect location because of several other ministries that were part of Mid-India Christian Mission. The women's ministry could provide costumes. Teachers and students in the school could be actors and actresses. And the Bethlehem Bible Institute teachers could record Bible lessons. Carl Lawrence was already involved to some extent because he was having Dr. Lal translate his award-winning book, The Church in China, into the Hindi language because they could see a similar movement in India as had taken place in China. Carl was the missionary speaker for the Haven of Radio broadcast out of California. It was suggested that I get together with him and also Dr. Donald McGavran because Dr. McGavran had called Carl to encourage him to get involved with Good News Productions International in helping to build a studio in India. Well, this led Carl going with me to India in January of 1988 to discuss the entire strategy. 34 Indian representatives from all over India met with us for those discussions. Groundbreaking took place on January 19, 1988, at the close of that visit. And the dedication service for the first unit came the next year on August 27, 1989. Well, great strides were made as Bible series were being produced, along with several documentaries. The attention of the government was captured with the concept of local productions in the national language of Hindi. Requests were even made by them for some programs that were Bible-based. On April 7, 1993, an ex-Hindu high priest sat with 6 other ex-Hindus in a hotel. This one held up a videotape and said, "This is why I'm a Christian." Then they all watched the nationwide broadcast of a program produced in Damoh entitled Young Eyes, and that was about the care at the Christian hospital to help with eye disease. On Christmas Eve and then Christmas Day of 1993, the birth of Christ was broadcast to over 100 million people in the Hindi language on Doordarshan, the national satellite network covering all of India. The facility there soon expanded to accommodate the growth and use of various technologies, including the first Christian internet site in the Hindi language. Workers would be actively involved in starting other centers and in the overall development of media structure in India. They also helped on projects in other countries. Singapore had been identified as an important area because of its location as a crossroads of travel and business. It would be ideal as a center where strategies could be discussed and developed in partnership with missionaries and national workers throughout the entire Eastern Asia area. There would also be excellent access to equipment and people for production. On one of the trips to India, I stopped by Singapore to see Rich and Joanne Shealy to get a feel for their level of interest in the kind of work being done by Good News Productions International. They had been used in many different ways by God, and they were using video series. They were thinking at the same time that things being done in Chinese would be a great benefit, but they didn't want to duplicate what was being done at Good News Productions International. Well, much prayer had been offered about Singapore by both Good News Productions International and the Shealys. By 1991 in Singapore, things were ready to move forward. An affiliation agreement was drawn up, much like we had with India. In 1993, construction began on facilities in partnership with the Canaan Christian Church. Then it was ready for occupancy in August of 1995. Redemptive analogies provide the key to the most effective means of presenting the gospel of Christ, and this was used extensively within the Chinese culture. Bible-related Chinese characters were used as the basis for a documentary and a motion picture entitled Source of Love. An exciting aspect of the work among the Chinese was their participation. When the research and Unveiling the Mystery documentary were finished, there were 370 Chinese people who gathered on March 14, 1998, to consider a further project. The motion picture idea was presented, and the people got behind it with a commitment of an equivalent of over $26,000 US. Singapore was used as a basis for the development of other centers in the world for several years. Thailand was a focus of Good News Productions International as we pursued the challenges of Robert Morris and other Christian workers there. Many nationals from Chiang Mai had come to Bible colleges in the USA and were anxious to work on productions in several tribal languages. Good News Productions International partnered on 2 projects with Alan Eubanks, who had begun the Christian Communications Center at Payat University in Chiang Mai. One project was to send engineers to set up their equipment, and the other was to help direct a production in the Thai language for use in high schools on the prevention of AIDS, and this was done all over Thailand. Tom Silkwood was a missionary in Thailand and saw the great need of visual communications in local languages. He actually began Freedom Films under the umbrella of the North Burma Christian Mission. In a spirit of partnership, he came with Ron Morris to Good News Productions in 1992 for discussions. An affiliation agreement was drawn up, and a great partnership began with them. Since Singapore was a center for electronic supplies, Tom Silkwood was already going there to purchase equipment and to get help from that regional center. Good News Production International producer Donald Liao made several trips to Chiang Mai to help train Tom Silkwood and the staff at Freedom Films. Singapore would also be the center to help develop other works in Southeast Asia. Kenya Kenya turned out to be a pivotal location from which to carry on work in Africa. As in other areas of Africa, there was an urgent need for culturally relevant materials which could be produced on the field. A regional center would make it possible to utilize the abilities of many national teachers and leaders attending Daystar University and would facilitate the ongoing production of materials for use all over Africa. Nairobi, Kenya had been chosen as a result of a survey among many Christian workers in Africa, and it proved to be an excellent choice. George Pickens was working with the Rainbow Church of Christ, Daystar University, and the Great Commission School. He then worked with Mike Schrage, who was living in Kitale at the time, to help set up meetings in Nairobi to discuss the future possibilities. Men from the Churches of Christ, Wendell Broom, Dennis Okoth, Jim Reppert, Sam Shoemaker, and others, were a great help in determining plans for a major initiative. There was a wonderful spirit of cooperation that was felt by all as plans were being made for the future. Production was already underway for the Pokot people, and many contacts had been made. Mike Schrage agreed to be the regional director, and he moved to Nairobi with his family to lay further groundwork and oversee the building of a facility there. Groundbreaking was on November 18, 1994. Marvin Brandt and Marvin Faulkner each spent several months on site overseeing construction. Dedication services were then held on September 9th of 1995 with Rubel Shelley and Sam Stone as speakers. The Kirk Hayes family also moved from Kitale to Nairobi to work in the new center. That was along with some African staff members as well. George Pickens led us to contact Bob Sartoris, who joined the staff after a few years. Several film strip series were produced, and the solar-powered audiovisual packs were used extensively there. Video productions began, and the Kenya broadcast networks aired everything that could be produced. A Church of Christ missionary, O'Neill Tankersley, had a small production team in Eldoret, Kenya, and he worked closely with the center in Nairobi in joint productions. Missionaries in neighboring countries cooperated in a wonderful way, and the work spread quickly. Productions like Tough Choices inspired many and found their way not only on national television, but into many churches and schools. On May 9, 2002, a sequel teaching drama was launched in Uganda. The Honorable Miriam Matembe spoke. She said, "This is fantastic. I will make sure that this is seen by every child in every school in this country." Spanish materials had been some of the first to be produced in the Joplin facility, and several worked with us in coordinating Spanish projects. Bob Gurwell had worked with us closely since the beginning of Good News Productions International. On June 6th of 1977, there were actually 25 missionaries and national preachers who met to discuss the use of film strips and videotape series in the follow-up program to a satellite project with NASA. The International Christian Mission Institute had started in Puerto Rico and would also help in this major outreach project. Bill Morgan and Bob Gurwell coordinated many Spanish projects, but it was in 1996 before Bob would open a temporary office in Eagle Pass, Texas. On April 14, 1997, a lease was signed with Colegio Biblico for the use of a building on their campus until a permanent center could be built in Mexico. Tom Nutt took work crews down to remodel the building and then later to oversee the building in Mexico. Many teaching series were being produced along with a few teaching dramas. On March 5, 2003, it was an exciting day as a new program was launched in Monterrey, Mexico, before a crowd of 800 people. On the same night, the announcement was made that Gustavo Valenquez was the new regional director for Mexico. Bob Gurwell was presented as the director for all Hispanic advancement. By 2004, production was being done inside Mexico at the new center, even before they moved in to the building later in 2008. The Philippines has a long history of mission work by Christian churches, and they were eager to partner with Good News Productions International. Kevin Bryant went there and to other countries to do some initial productions, but the churches in the Philippines were anxious to have their own weekly broadcast. The groundwork for this was done out of Singapore, with both Rich Shealy and Donald Liao traveling frequently to meet with churches and missionaries to help in production. Work expanded with the weekly production of Salt and Light. The churches actually raised funds for broadcast expenses, and Good News Production International helped in the production cost. Nanette Piccoli was hired full-time as the regional director and put together a team of Filipino workers in 1998. The Ukraine came into its own when the Iron Curtain came down. I had the opportunity to go with YWAM to lecture in Krasnodar, Russia. While there, I was particularly taken with Nikolai Alyoshin, who was the head of the International Rice Institute. He was searching for truth and was very open to a scientific approach since he is a scientist. We talked a lot about my having come to faith myself through such evidence, especially through archaeological evidence for the Bible. Nikolai soon became very interested in the restoration position. I put him in contact with Max Goins, who was living in Moscow at the time. A couple of weeks after Nikolai was baptized, he was actually put in prison because of that. But while in prison, baptized some 27 people in less than a month. Nikolai later became a prison chaplain with the American Rehabilitation Ministries. A major issue in that country was that the former USSR actually was very atheistic. But they were faced with many different doctrines when the Iron Curtain came down. These doctrines were being proclaimed in Russia by all sorts of religious groups. So the big question arose and was asked, we thought Christianity was one thing, and now we are confused by the conflicting doctrines. How can we know the truth? About the time that we were searching for someone who could address this very question through the distribution of video lessons, I was contacted by George Karolay of the Crimea American College, who told me of Sergei Golovin. Sergei read himself into New Testament positions while working as a geophysicist for the old USSR. He came back to Simferopol and found George. Well, in 1998, I arranged for David Dunlap, who was the son of a former missionary in Rhodesia named Owen Dunlap. David was a videographer in the USA, and so he went and taped a series with Sergei on science and the Bible. The success of this led to arranging a more permanent relationship with Sergei in meetings that we had May 17th through to the 21st of 1999. Sergei and Nikolai soon became friends and did projects together. This vision developed out of a real need, and God provided Sergei, who was perfect from a scientific position, to lead in this vision. He immediately started producing more lessons on apologetics. Sergei got together with Michael Badowski with GISA TV and was offered a broadcast spot on the local TV station. The previously recorded lessons were then split into segments to answer questions that were asked of people who were interviewed on the street, and Sergei served as the host. Chandigarh, India. It offered a great opportunity as it is the breadbasket of India. My personal passion for India actually began during World War II. I had a cousin who was a civil engineer in the Army, and he helped build the railway in India because it was needed as a supply line. But when he came to the USA on leave, I was telling him of my admiration for him as a soldier and how one day I wanted to be one as well. He explained that the best thing I could do would be to pray for the people of India because they needed Christ. I began praying. Then Helen and I went to Kopahar years later, of course, in 1977. I had read about that mission for many years. Madonna Burgett Spratt went there when she left Zimbabwe and wanted us to come to do some projects, as I explained earlier. We were immediately impressed with the people and the open opportunities. One reason we had gone there was to produce the film strip series in Hindi and to produce other programs, as well as design a mobile unit with the manufacturer's plant in New Delhi, India. It was to serve as a medical and multimedia mobile unit. Well, when David Lal met Deepak and Simi Dhingra from Chandigarh with the potential of opening a center there, which is right in the heart of the Punjab area of India, I was delighted. Both Deepak and Simi had a great interest in using audiovisual resources and were excited about the possibilities. This center developed quickly because of one lady who provided funding for both the building and the needed equipment. Workers from Damoh headed up construction. They headed up everything that took place there under their supervision. The dedication service was then December 9th of 2003. Very soon, inroads were being made into the entire Urdu-speaking peoples of that region of India. In Southeast Asia, there's a bright spot in the Good News Production International Network. We had been involved in producing film strips through some of the international students who had been pointed to us by Robert Morris and other missionaries in Thailand. Ron Morris helped coordinate these efforts and also promoted GNPI among his supporters. The difficulty was getting things into the Southeastern Asian country. With the potential so great, though, we were looking for other ways of getting the gospel into the local languages. I was particularly interested in a student at Cincinnati Christian University, and when he came, he started sending a gift of $10 each month to Good News Productions International. I was curious. Well, one day Sam Stone introduced me to him at Bridgetown, Ohio, which is where Sam and Gwen were attending church at the time. Later, David Lal and I met with Timothy and several other students for a somewhat social visit. Laverne Morris was sponsoring these students and was also present at that meeting. Timothy later told me that he had started giving support to Good News Production International because of a film strip he had seen in the Rawang language that we had produced many years earlier. Timothy's wife, Mayram, is the daughter of the man who worked closely with Robert Morris. The two of them had led in securing the property where the Mingalar studio is now located for Good News Productions International. Sindang Sakram was a student at Ozark Christian College and had helped us produce the Rawang film strips. He wanted an audiovisual pack, which we had actually sent after he returned to his homeland. But on the trip to get it, Sindang walked through an area that he did not know was restricted and was put in prison. Finally, after 3 months, we heard from him, and he reported that he had been at the end of a whip, making gravel out of larger stones, 14 to 16 hours a day. This went on all those 3 months when we weren't hearing from him. He said it was worth it all, though, because he said on that trip, he got the audiovisual pack. He explained that he used to have 40 or 50 people when he would announce preaching services, but since he got the AV pack, the crowds were attracted, and there were more like 500 or 600, and baptisms were by the hundreds instead of tens. All of this commitment really impressed us. And when Timothy asked me to come and discuss the potential there, I was eager to go. Timothy was actually the academic dean of the Eastern Bible Institute, but felt that the work of Good News Productions International was too crucial to pass up, so he committed himself to it. He slowly phased out of the role of dean to become regional director. Video was not an option at that time, but Timothy wanted to make Christian music tapes to use in large youth rallies where he would then insert Bible verses and short thoughts between the songs. On my third visit, I asked David Lal to join me so he could research and give advice about the necessary equipment that would be needed to do those things. As that developed, new mission systems helped provide money for the building so it could be larger and also serve as a church building and a training center. Bill McClure wanted a place to do recording for gospel broadcasting mission and provided money for the equipment. The dedication of the building was February 7th, 2004. Great strides have been made, and God has opened many doors through evangelism and leadership training development. Regional center development has been critical in accomplishing the objectives of those early visionaries who committed themselves in partnering together in this unique ministry. That vision will be accomplished through partnerships and a growing work of Christian communicators strategically placed throughout the world. Significant events have already taken place beyond what we could ever envision or even imagine when Good News Productions International was first launched. But God is being praised through those events, and it will continue until the earth is filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. That's as recorded in Habakkuk 2:14.